and consumer sciences. Many of you are here as already accepted future graduate students in the Family Studies and Human Development program. So if you're here visiting, we can say hello. Okay, those are the folks you guys need to say hello, meet, encourage them to come. But we're happy that you're here to join us, especially to hear about everybody's research today. Family Studies and Human Development here in the Norton School has an undergraduate program, and also you can get a Master's of Science or a Doctor of Philosophy. Our focus is really on improving the quality of life for children, youth, and families. We do this not only through teaching, but also through research, outreach, and extension. You'll hear the entire range of everything today. Also, you know that I'm the director for the Francis McClellan Institute. I'm Andrea Romero. I told you a little bit about the Institute earlier today, for those of you who were here this morning. We are honoring the legacy of Francis McClellan, who was an advocate for children, youth, and families, for people with disabilities, for immigrant families. She was a business leader and a philanthropist. Through the Institute, we focus on providing resources and infrastructure to support new research and continuing research. Oh, just to remind you here, especially for our current graduate students, deadline for submitting for FMI dissertation grants and FMI travel funds is March 15th. You can find those forms on our website. And if you want to know more about the Francis McClellan Institute, you can find us. You can also find the Norton School on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. The Lang Lab is right across the hallway from here. Some of you will get a tour of it today or tomorrow. Those of you who are here, who are interested, let us know anytime. We have a wonderful facility, really state-of-the-art lab for child and family observation. We have a biohazard room where we can do blood draws and store cortisol, and we have many rooms with one-way mirrors and a video capability and audio capability. We also have the coding lab where we offer a lot of software. I've already gone too long, so I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm the odd bird here because I represent retailing and consumer sciences. So what am I doing here? I don't know. I'm going to present to you a little bit of my research interests, which are aligned a little bit with what is going on in family studies. And I am also a proud holder of a courtesy appointment of FSHD, for which I'm very grateful. So that's actually why I'm here. Okay? One of my major research interests is in overconsumption. People consume a lot. We all do. Yeah? And there are inherent challenges associated with consuming way too much. So I'm interested in a couple of those. Yeah? So overconsumption can be looked at, for instance, in the context of effects on health, obesity, yeah? Cholesterol, whatever you want to look at. But there's many bad health effects of overconsumption if we're just looking at food. But we can also look at the impacts on our society. That's just, consumer temples. What does it mean when people spend a lot of money on product and can't, save enough resources to feed their families? We have a lot of trash because all the stuff we consume ends up in landfills at some point. So overconsumption has a variety of negative outcomes, and those I'm interested in. Not all of them, but some. We consume so much that if the whole world would consume like American consumers, we would need 5 planets right now. Guess what? We don't have 5 planets. Any of you saw that movie, The Martian? Yeah? So you might remember how he tried to grow food and how all of a sudden everything was frozen, and it's just not that easy. So the conclusion is we can't go to Mars tomorrow. Yeah? We only have 1 planet, that's this one. So we gotta take care of it. And some of us do, more than others, and we would like to encourage more people to be more careful about the environment. Yeah? So don't end up like this. There's a lot of inequity that surrounds issues of consumption. Yeah? We are living in a world where there's overpopulation on one hand side and rising prosperity in other regions of the world where people start consuming more and more and more and more. It's causing inequality, a lot of social strife, and a lot of problems for consumers, for families, for individuals. Yeah? This is a statement here from the director of the European Environmental Agency, who points out Well, somebody's got to take a leadership role. Currently, it's more Europe than it's the United States, particularly currently, for the next couple of years, most likely. And we cannot continue with current consumption patterns. It is simply impossible. You just saw it. We can't go to Mars. We only have one planet. So, on a positive note, there's ways how consumers can better cope with this, and how people can better cope with this. And so one of my main research interests is in how mindfulness can maybe help us in reducing overconsumption. If people are more mindful about the resources that they use and how they use them, maybe that's one suitable approach in order to decrease overconsumption, and with that also the negative effects it has on people in our society today. So mindfulness is one of my research areas. So mindfulness, a mode of consciousness capabilities by attending to the present and being more present-minded, which may have an impact also on how we consume. I particularly look in my research on particular consumption habits that people may have, because the idea is if we are more like this dog here, yeah, and think about what's currently happening in our world and what we currently need, and not always be thinking about all sorts of other stuff that are going on in our mind. We pay more attention to our needs and what we consume. And that may actually help us addressing overconsumption. So an assumption in that is that we, if we are more mindful, we break with established consumption routines and habits, and that can lead us to a path of less consumption with positive effects on individuals and families. So that's a very positive thing. And there's also a very negative thing. So that's one that I want to address here, another research field that I have. Well, overconsumption then also can lead to climate change. Actually, overconsumption is one of the leading factors in explaining climate change. All in the room here probably have heard about climate change. It's actually happening. And it's very threatening. So another research area of mine is how do we as people, as humans, deal with the fact that our environment is drastically changing. Yeah? It's already changing now. It's affecting our mental health, for some people more than for others. And the scope and the magnitude of the changes that will happen to us in the future are immense. How do we deal with that? So this causes anxiety in a lot of people, and I would like to research, hopefully with the help of some of you, what that means for us, for families and for individuals that live in this changing environment. Thank you so much.
Oh, two-handed. I'm Michelle Walsh, and I lead a team here at the Norton School called the Community Research Evaluation and Development Team, or CRED. It's a team of research and evaluation professionals who come from really diverse backgrounds. And I'm never going to get through it if I don't read. From public health, from education, border studies, geography, international relations, and quantitative psychology. And we bring a range of perspectives to the community-based work that we do. But one thing that really unites us all is our mutual dislike of this particular picture of ours. It's the only one we have, so I'll keep using it. So rather than being focused on a particular content area, although our work is broadly under the Family Studies and Human Development umbrella, we are specifically aligned with the goal of really putting social science to work for solving social problems. And in order to do this, we have these three sort of guiding principles, if you will, that we adhere to, which is to try to be creative and using diverse methods and approaches, really unpacking what the social context is and means and for the work that we're doing, and especially this idea of leveraging university resources to serve the community as a whole. In order to do that, we work with a multitude of partners, really both here in the city, across the state, and across the nation, and most recently also internationally. We're working with some folks studying black holes from an international research team. So, like I said, the content area is pretty diverse. For this work, this idea of really unpacking and understanding the social context, one of the areas where we work a lot is in rural areas. And as part of this particular project with the USDA, we generated a typology of Arizona's rural areas on variables of access and risk, demography, to try to identify what types of communities underutilized SNAP, or food stamps for those. And one of the things that we knew from our experience, because we work in so many rural areas, but wanted to be able to demonstrate empirically is this idea that rural areas are very diverse. There's not a rural and an urban, that we need to look at the diversity of that sort of social context. And so we did this project because it's very important for local folks to really understand the challenges they might have in program development, for instance, if they're trying to work in communities that are geographically adjacent, but maybe very, very different culturally. So this kind of diversity, though, means that small area analyses are really important in the sort of work we do, where you want to look beyond below even the county level. And although these data are very difficult to obtain, they're very important for folks who are working in communities. This is just one example of our attempt to distill some really detailed data down into something that's really useful and accessible for the community partners that we work with. And so sort of we like to think of ourselves as kind of, given the Winter Olympics, like figure skaters, where we try to take something that's really complex and try to make it look really simple and accessible. We developed these for 79 rural communities and 25 urban communities around the state. Then moving from food to schools, this is work that we did locally to try to identify how we might measure kindness in schools, working with students and teachers and administrators in a bottom-up concept mapping piece to come up with a number of constructs that we might want to measure, then develop pilot instruments and test them out with a local school district. And so that's work that's currently underway. In some of our other youth-focused work, this is, we partnered to do an evaluation with Camp Born This Way, which is a summer residential camp for transgender and gender creative youth and their families. This is some of what the youth liked most about being at camp. Our goal there was really to take a snapshot about what happens at camp and what some of the potential ripple effects might be. And here, talking about really growing the advocacy community. I only have a minute, see, I told you I'd never get through it. But we also work in early childhood in areas way across the state, including with 9 of the 10 tribal areas that partner with the Early Childhood Health and Education Board. We develop biennial community assessments with secondary data across all of these different areas for all these communities that are accessible online, as well as working with them to look at statewide work that's also accessible online. So these are really used by a number of places. We do more work in early childhood, policy relevant work. Again, things that are accessible by community members, including a recent legislative advocacy day piece that we were involved in, showing the importance of two-generation approaches in looking at child care. So that's the kind of community-based work we do. If you like community-based, applied, policy relevant, come talk to us. Oh, I did it!
Okay, my name is Kate Spears. I'm an extension specialist and assistant professor, so I work with extension. So there will be no surprise that my work has community or applied focus. In general, I do obesity prevention in early care and education settings. I do this work for a number of reasons. First, we know there's an obesity epidemic. This is a problem we need to address. It has implications for young kids and adults' physical and mental health. And I do this work in early care and education or child care settings, mostly because this is where young children spend a lot of their time. So it's a good place to intervene. It's also, I think, a great place to intervene because you can directly intervene with the providers and change what goes on in child care. But then through the providers, you can also have an impact on parents because parents and providers have pretty regular contact. So it's a good way to get at the two settings where young children spend a lot of their time. So if we think about early care and education settings, there are lots of different places we can intervene to have an impact on young children's health and well-being. My work currently focuses on 3 of these. The first is making sure that kids have access to nutritious meals and snacks. And the first project that I'm doing in this area is an extension project with the extension agent in Yavapai County, Hope Wilson. So this project has 2 goals: to increase early literacy skills and promote fruit and vegetable consumption in young preschool-age children. We do this through 2 components to the program. The first is having child care providers read books to kids that have a fruit or vegetable or healthy eating focus, and then extending those messages from the book throughout the day through gardening, taste test, and cooking activities. We are currently at the end of a feasibility study, so we finished collecting data and we're starting to analyze it, looking at the need for Seed to Read, getting some feedback on the curriculum that we've developed so far, as well as starting to think about what kind of data we can collect for evaluation. Looking forward, we'll take the results from that feasibility study, we'll make some revisions, we'll do a pilot study, we'll make some more revisions, we'll do an evaluation study with an intervention and control group or comparison group. We'll probably make some more revisions at that point, and then our final overall goal is statewide or even nationwide dissemination through extension. The next area that I work in this area is, again, with nutrition and making sure kids have access to healthy meals, is looking at the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which is a federal nutrition subsidy paid to child care providers for them to provide healthy meals and snacks to kids. You can think of it as school lunch and breakfast program, but for child care centers. Here I'm interested in understanding family daycare or home-based daycare providers' experiences participating in the program, and how can we use the program to get training to these child care providers. So I'm currently working on this work with a team of researchers in Illinois. We've collected some survey and interview data. We also have some administrative data where we can look at entries and exits from the program and variables that might predict those. Looking forward, we're going to do surveys with sponsoring agencies, which may be organizations that we can use to deliver some of the training. The next area that I work in is making sure that child care providers feed young children in a way that promotes healthy eating habits. And here I've again collected some survey and interview data from child care providers working in a variety of settings. I've used the results from that research, suggested that child care providers needed some help around role modeling healthy eating. So I put together an online training for child care providers around that topic. I'm currently in the process of pilot testing and evaluating that. And my future work will combine interviews with child care providers as well as videotape mealtime observations to really get at what do providers say they're doing around feeding young children, what are their ideas about it, but then using the videotape mealtime observations to know what are they actually doing. And my final project is looking at physical activity promotion. Here I am working with a colleague in Delaware, and we have picked out 7 of the 9 states that actually have childcare licensing laws that meet best practices around physical activity for toddlers. So there are only 9 states that are doing this in the country, and we wanted to know how are these states able to do this? What does it look like when they then go to implement, enforce, and communicate about and provide training and technical assistance about these licensing standards? So we did in-depth interviews with licensing administrators, state government officials, and other nonprofit partners, and what we've done is pulled out a set of recommendations for all of the other states so that they can get themselves up to speed. And that's it. And I have 8 seconds left.
9 states? I'm super nervous about this. I will not hit escape, for sure. Did I do it right? Oh, right. Okay. Here's me, Melissa Curran. I'm on the right slide. That's a great news. Okay, and I wish that I could have done a gazillion like Kate just did. I love that. But I knew I would never talk that fast because I'm so calm and zen-like. Instead, what I did is I listed overall the research that I did. So most generally, I'm interested really in everything, but I'm most interested in couple and family relationships. And so here's all the projects that I do. I'm really interested in the transition of parenthood for couples and families, finances and relationships. I have some really great data about relational sacrifices and relationship quality, things like commitment, satisfaction, conflict, vagueness. There's so many good things out there. I love anything statistical. I've learned so much from the great Emily Butler and the wonderful Xiaomi Mean. So there's wonderful things that we can do statistically, and I love learning about new things statistically. So most of the stuff that we do are APAM's actor-partner interdependence models with dire data. And then I also have a wonderful collaborator, Catherine Marshall, where we do cancer and family systems. And so we've done really great work about testing the effectiveness of a family-based intervention. Who's my translator here? Una frase para la familia. It translates to? A hug or an embrace for family. So I'm only going to talk about the first 2, okay? So the transition of parenthood for couples and families. So I love this data set. This is a data set I have in Melissa Barnett. And then we have 5,000 couples at baseline. Let's just pause a minute. We did not collect that. It was given to us, okay? Woo! But 5,000 couples at baseline, there's 3 types of measurement. There's wonderful couple level measures. So there's great data about support and affection, conflict, IPB, which stands for intimate partner balance, infidelity, which is super, super interesting. It's a great set to do something called person-centered approaches, and if you're like, what is that? Come talk to me, I'll tell you more. It's really interesting. Olena, who I just saw, Melissa Barnett's great student, has a wonderful paper in Journal of Family Psychology using person-centered and building strong families. The wonderful, amazing Shamin Lee, to which I dedicated a shrine, as everyone knows, because I'm just so positive about Shamin. She literally, in her first semester of graduate school, discovered variables we didn't know existed in our grant-funded project, put them into an analysis, and has submitted them as the first author of manuscript to Journal of Marriage and Family. Shamin! And then my transition slide is Ashley LeBaron. How we could use these things. All right, next slide is finances and romantic relationships. I love anything to do with finances. They're so interesting, right? So there's lots of different financial projects, but we have wonderful data that we started here at the U of A. It's called A+, Arizona Pathways to Life Success for University Students. Some of you know it. Would have been cool if y'all were in it, but no, sorry, it came a little later, but you could have been in it. But we have 10 years of data on about 800 young adults transitioning to adulthood. Awesome data. So it's about 18 to 28. We have super interesting data about student loans and debt. And if you're a student and you know anything about student loans and debt, this is like the thing that everyone talks about right now. We have great data about financial socialization from parents, the romantic partner, the own young adult money management. We have great data about scales using relationship satisfaction and commitment. We have attachment, which is the basis for everything. Our wonderful Shamin has already submitted proposals to IAR and NCFR. Ashley LeBaron, think about how we can get data. This would be amazing, right? And then finally, so you're like, building strong families, interesting. A+, interesting. So you listed A, B. I have a C project, the Chris Seagren project, the technique that I call out. So maybe you want to collect some of your own data, and Emily's nodding. We have a great technique that I call the Chris Seagren technique. We literally ask our wonderful undergraduate students and their partners to take a survey, like a diary survey. And then we have them ask their friends, their roommates, their parents, who are the best reporters ever, who follow instructions. And then we offer extra credit. So the amount of data that we get and the amount of money that it costs is amazing. So there's little or no cost for us. We've done this in communication. I've done this. Butler's done this. IRB is pretty good about this. And we've had output in really good journals. So Casey Totenhagen, my wonderful advisee, I also have a shrine to her. She published her dissertation papers in Journal of Family Psychology and Journal of Social and Personal Relations, which are great journals. So of course, Ashley, we have ideas here, right? That's it. Thank you so much.
As always, it's really hard to follow Melissa's So I'm Melissa Barnett, I'm Associate Professor, and the key motivation for my program of research is the idea that experiencing supportive early relationships really provide foundations for positive development for children. And what really why I do this, what gets me up in the morning, is the idea that experiencing these positive, supportive relationships are probably most critical and yet most threatened for children exposed to poverty and other high-stress contexts. So the idea that these opportunity gaps, in other words, lack of opportunities to participate regularly, they are advancing automatically in these relationships, lead to developmental disparities. But it's not all doom and gloom, because in fact we know that many young children from disadvantaged backgrounds actually do experience positive development, and not because there's something superhero-like about them or their caregivers. It's really because of what Ann Masson has called ordinary magic. So they've had the opportunity to participate in these protective systems and relationships that promote their positive development. So the real goal of my research program is to find the magic, find the ordinary magic. And this includes identifying, focusing on child, family, and community strengths. So really understanding what are people already doing well, and how can we bolster those kinds of experiences. And then really recognizing that child development and the relationships in which children are participating are shaped by context. And Some of the key contexts in my work include economic disadvantage, culture. I'm interested in rural and urban contexts, as well as increasingly early childhood education settings. So we also know that children benefit from multiple and consistent supportive relationships. So the magic is spread around. And in my work, I focus a lot on mothers, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about fathers, grandmothers, as well as early childhood education teachers. I'm also interested in understanding how child and caregiver characteristics influence both the kind of supportive caregiving relationships as well as the effects of those relationships on young children. And some of the characteristics for children I think about are temperament, child sex, their sort of foundational skills that might contribute to gains in language and social skills. For caregivers, I think about their depression, their social support, their efficacy, and their life experiences. Turning first to work about fathers, so really we know increasingly that the quality of early father-child relationships can be really key resources for children's social and emotional development. And we know that fathers in some ways are not all that different from mothers, in that the supportive caregiving, having these supportive, responsive interactions for mothers and fathers actually look quite similar and have some similar impacts on kids. So this actually comes from the Building Strong Families data. Melissa Curran didn't mention there's also good parenting and child outcome data in that data set.
Important contributions.
That's right. And so the point here is we see that both mothers and fathers parenting here is contributing in ways that above and beyond each other, contributing in positive ways to children's development. But really, interestingly, we know that different factors influence the supportive parenting of mothers and fathers. So even though those parenting behaviors may look kind of similar, they may be influenced by different things. And again, this becomes critical in terms of thinking about how do we promote more of this ordinary magic. And so just in some of my work, these are some of the factors that we've been interested in looking at. Things like co-parenting, some child characteristics, interpartner violence, as well as marital quality or marital relationships. Turning next then to grandmothers, who are my other favorite topic. We know that grandparents often play key supportive roles for mothers and grandchildren, and they can bring multi-generational advantages and disadvantages when the grandparents themselves may be coming from under-resourced backgrounds. But we don't really know much in general about grandparents. We tend to know about really specialized populations. So what about the spectrum of involvement? Most work on grandparents and grandchildren leaves out the middle generation or the parent generation. And what I'm most interested in is what about the quality of those grandparent-grandchild interactions and how do they contribute to children's development? So right now we are about to launch data collection. We're waiting on final IRB approval. I'm working with some collaborators, one of whom is a gerontologist and the other one's a clinical psychologist. We are launching an online national survey of grandparents. This won't necessarily be an economically disadvantaged sample, but we're doing this to pilot test and to develop some measures that eventually we want to use for some pilot data to go for an NIH grant. And so fathers, grandmothers, and early childhood educators. So actually increasingly my work is focused on ECE. And really we know that the sensitivity of the supportive relationships of early childhood teachers and the quality of those relationships with children promote positive development. And these effects may be greatest for those exposed to less responsive parenting at home. And so we're working on some secondary data analysis, another great longitudinal birth cohort data set. Even if you don't like little kids, there's good data about their parents. Look at that. And I am running out of time, so I'm going to skip forward and say, future sort of moving forward, really understanding the quality of those early home interactions and how they are influencing children's school readiness and other aspects of their positive development. And that we actually have learned a lot about how to get parents to read more to their kids, which is important. But we've learned a lot less about how to get them to actually engage in more supportive ways that promote school readiness. So I'm working on some secondary data analysis with this. I've also been trying really hard to get some money, grant money, to work with Make Way for Books, which is a local community-based family literacy organization. It does really amazing work in the community, and we feel like they're only capturing a little bit of the amazing work they're doing, so we want to work with them to better capture what we think they're doing to really change the nature of parent-child interactions. Also increasingly interested in understanding teacher-child relationship quality in preschool, and that we know it's an even better predictor than poverty. And so we're looking at that, and we have a grant application right now. Kate Spears is actually a co-PI on that for some secondary data, and I'm working on collaborating with the local Head Start grantee here to look at their data they already have and then to collect some data about teachers, parents, and children. So, that's it.
Okay, I'm Russ Toomey. I'm going to kick us down the lifespan about 5 to 10 years and kick off the adolescent portion for today. So my research focuses on how do we help sexual and gender minority youth thrive in oppressive contexts. This is ever so important now. So my work is largely framed from a minority stress perspective, which has traditionally focused on the stressors, but it's been adapted recently to focus on some of the things that Melissa Barnett was talking about with thriving and the magic that can happen to help youth thrive. So a lot of my work is focused on the structural oppressions that youth encounter, sexual and gender minority youth encounter, whether that's state laws, oppressive state laws like no promo homo laws, like we have here in Arizona, or minority stressors that are at the interpersonal level, and so thinking about bias-based victimization or parental rejection based on sexual or gender minority status, and how those are associated with health and well-being. And then my work, most importantly, I feel, focuses on resilience factors like coping strategies and the ways that we can help youth cope and thrive in these environments that are very difficult to change over time. And so I'll walk you through a few of my projects that focus on specific coping styles such as mindfulness or meditation. Worked with Michelle Walsh on that project, and a new project at the Art Museum. The ultimate goal of my research is really to inform practice, prevention, policy, any way that we can help make LGBT youth lives better today instead of waiting until policy changes for the better. So 3 current projects use multiple modes of data and knowing. One is secondary data with large data sets. So this project up here, it's kind of hard to see, is from the 40 Developmental Assets Framework from the Search Institute. And it's over 120,000 adolescents. We were able to add a sexual orientation and a gender identity question to that questionnaire that were inclusive. And we're able to look at these 40 positive youth developmental assets and see how they, specifically for LGBT youth, promote and resilience and thriving. Another project I have is looking at the intersections of different marginalized identities. And so this project looks at Latinx sexual and gender minority youth and how cultural backgrounds may actually help influence resilience and thriving, and how you can draw sources of strength from one piece of your identity that help inform resilience to other pieces of your identity. That was an online survey of about 400 Latinx sexual and gender minority individuals. And then finally, in my prevention area, I'm working with the University of Arizona Museum of Art and the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation to evaluate a prevention project called Mapping Q. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So this is just an example of some of my work. It's really important, I think, to look at within group heterogeneity or difference, what helps explain resilience, what helps explain risk. And we see this from our 120,000 adolescent sample that there's actually difference, that it's not just transgender youth at risk, but there's variability in transgender youth at risk for suicide. And so we see, for example, that transgender female to male youth are at the highest risk, and so now we can target intervention more effectively. We also do some within person profile techniques, person-centered techniques, and we're able to identify, for instance, different patterns among Latinx and sexual and gender minority youth in terms of how salient their identities are. And so we see from this project that actually very few youth have very high central to themselves identities around being Latinx and being sexual or gender minority youth, and also feel positively about those. And that positivity and centrality is what's really important for health and well-being. Lastly, this intervention around Mapping Q is really trying to help them navigate oppressive contexts like museums are traditionally thought of as spaces for white privileged, heterosexual, cisgender youth, and it's taking over that oppressive context and making it their own. And we're seeing some very modest changes from our pre-post intervention survey. We also did qualitative interviews and ethnography with this study, but we're seeing slight gains in exploration around identity, sense of community, efficacy, and large decreases in depressive symptoms and burdensomeness. So really promising for future directions for research and prevention. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elisa Delgado, and my work generally focuses on Latino adolescent well-being. I examine different predictors across different contexts, and I draw from strengths-based perspectives, cultural ecological models, and developmental frameworks. And to address first the link between risk and adolescent well-being. So in terms of risk, for instance, I'm really interested in ethnic discrimination, economic hardship, those kinds of risk factors, and then how they relate to well-being. So mental health, but particularly also academic achievement or academic outcomes. In these links, I'm also interested in understanding context or process. So for instance, in terms of context, I might be interested in feminism and how that might be a buffer against the negative effects of ethnic discrimination or economic hardship. But then also I'm also interested in maybe feminism or other kinds of factors such as feminism can help explain the relation between risk and well-being. And another aim that I have in my work is understanding adolescence from early to late adolescence. And I'm really interested in the different relationships in which adolescents have. So those with family, peers, and teachers. As I've mentioned, I'm interested in Latino youth. They do make up the largest and fastest growing group in public schools. And they are underrepresented in terms of how well they do in school and in academia, in the academic setting. Here are some sample studies. For study 1 and study 3, so study 1 is on economic hardship, and then study 3 is ethnic discrimination. I have used the Juntos data. This is data that was collected in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and we collected data from 246 adolescents and their mothers and fathers. And so I was interested in examining, so how do these different stressors relate to their adjustment in terms of mental health, risky behaviors, and academic achievement. And then the second study focused on data it's secondary data at health, it's representative data, but I just focused on the Latino sample of the secondary data, and I examined how friends matter in terms of how they matter in terms of school belonging and the overall academic outcomes. My current projects are this Project Student Success and the Advanced Project. In terms of Project Student Success, this was data that was collected in Central Texas. And the goal here is to understand positive youth development in terms of the 5 C's. If you've heard of the 5 C's, these refer to competence, confidence, character, connection, and caring. And the goals were to examine the processes linking positive youth development to academic well-being, and also to examine the role of positive youth development in social networks, in their friend networks. So basically, I went to a 6th grade center and collected data from 453 6th graders. And one way in which we can address the idea of social networks, so in terms of the different measures that the individual students responded or about, so positive development, cultural factors, academic outcomes, they also nominated up to their 10 closest friends. So not only do we have data on the individual adolescents, but we also have data on their 10 closest friends at school. And so then we can look at the different networks or different patterns that exist in youth at this particular school and how they might matter for their positive development and for their academic well-being. Another project is the academic identity and its role in predicting post-secondary achievement, or I also call this project the Advanced Project. This is a mixed method study. So quantitatively, I collected data from 282 adolescents, and Rainey, who is here, who I'm trying to recruit to come here, helped collect this data in Texas. We collected data from the 8th graders and their mom and or a dad. And so I'm also interested, like Melissa Burdett was saying, the importance that dads play, the role that dads play in these youth's lives. So we recruited from middle schools in Central Texas. And the goal here was really to understand academic identity in terms of math and science, specifically how parents, teachers, peers are sources of academic support and socialization for math and science identity, also for their school belonging, and in turn for their overall academic well-being. So the second component to the mixed methods is the qualitative component, in which we collected from the sample for the quantitative study subgroup of parents and adolescents to ask them more about this idea of math and science identity. So the measures that we have for academic identity really were designed for advanced high school students and for college students. And so really what I wanted to know is, are these measures applicable for the middle school population? So we scaled things way back and got from their voice, what does it mean to, does that mean my time is up? Oh, it is? Oh, I am so sorry. That's me
My research, my focus is to build on youth resiliency for them to be active agents in addressing health disparities in their own communities and schools. Also to work with adults and agency partnerships to create transformative community resilience. My focus is really more on resilience rather than on deficit. So stress models often focus on trying to fix something that is broken. And my research is really more focused on resilience, where I'm looking at what is right and how do we build on it. When I think of resilience, I think of not only the individual, but the individual and the environment together and what kind of resources they are both bringing. Some of my work is inspired by the Garcia-Cole integrative model. Some of the key elements of that model that drive my work is that it identifies racism, discrimination, and prejudice as a key factor of adversity, but yet also acknowledges adaptive and positive aspects of culture, components of family, while focusing on asset development. So what are the positive ways in which youth are developing? Still considering school neighborhood segregation and promotive and inhibitive factors within schools and neighborhoods. Part of my research has focused quite a bit on suicidality. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for young adults between ages of 15 to 24 years old. We know that there are disparities in suicidality. Some youth have higher risk than other youth, in particular LGBTQ youth, transgender youth. In fact, the suicide rate amongst teen girls has been at the highest rate ever in 2015. So the rate amongst girls for suicidality has really increased. For girls, it varies across ethnicity. We know in particular that Latina adolescent females have reported the highest rates of suicide attempts for over 40 years. I have a book I wrote about this that goes into a lot more depth about that particular issue. Some of my research, we've been looking at CDC data, which I do have access to, national data over the last 10 years, but also statewide data. Some of the publications that have come out of that work have shown that gun carrying has a very strong association with suicide attempts. Very often we're looking at gun carrying and worried about how youth are hurting other youth, and we often don't look at how they use those guns to hurt themselves. We also know that victims of bullying have increased risk of suicide. Also, bullies have increased risk of suicide. I have a line of research that has looked at how navigating between two cultural contexts that are in conflict with each other may cause stress for some youth, and it's associated with a variety of negative outcomes, not only for Latino youth, but also for white youth as well as Asian youth. In my lab right now, we call it the NOPO lab. It's why we have all the cactus. We have two major projects going on. One is the Love Project, and the other is a project on civic engagement and social justice. The Love Project is really focused on the concept of critical consciousness. So how do we understand our own reality within systems of oppression, privilege, and power? And how does that relate to things like socio-political action, or in other words, collective action to actually create social justice in the world? We are inspired by intersectionality theory, so we're not only looking at race, but we're also looking at intersections of race, gender, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation. Our data sources for this are, we've worked with an advanced family studies undergraduate class with undergraduates in that course who get involved in youth participatory action research, and they themselves provide counter-source photojournals and focus groups. And we're also actively working with a group in the community, youth 11 to 18 years old, and right now we're doing interviews with them. If you're interested in the photojournal methodology, I'd love to talk to you about that in the future. Our big question is, how are young adults engaged with society today? And what leads to more civic behavior? We're really interested in how young people are transforming the world around them. The second project is funded by the Spencer Foundation. And we're interested not only in civic engagement in traditional forms like voting and volunteerism, but also in forms of activism. It's very much driven by the socio-political development theory, which identifies critical worldview and social analysis, sense of agency, opportunity structures, and how all of that leads to greater socio-political behavior. The methods we're using for this study is a sequential mixed methods study design. We're recruiting actively right now, so if you haven't done a study and you're an undergraduate, you can still do it. We're recruiting students here at the university as well as the community college. There'll be 2 surveys, there will be focus groups in the middle. We're looking at papers that will answer the questions like, what types of profiles emerge related to social analysis? What education factors contribute to critical social analysis? And what factors contribute to civic outcomes? I just want to acknowledge all my wonderful graduate students that work with me. NOPO Lab, Navegando Oportunidades para Docentes Latinxes. We have 9 graduate students, and as you can see, we like to get together and eat and take pictures of ourselves. They are also very busy, submitted several abstracts to NLPA, to SRA. They're actively presenting at national conferences, and they're all working together on a variety of manuscripts. Which button? That's the button.
All right, well, here we go. So I'll be telling you about the work of the Health and Interpersonal Systems Research Group. That includes myself, Emily Butler, the various students working with me, and collaborators around campus, across the U.S. and internationally. And when I say health, you probably have a pretty good idea of what I mean. And when I say interpersonal systems, you probably don't have a clue. So that's what I'm going to try to explain in 5 minutes or less. So the big question that we're all interested in is, how do you go from social relationships to health and well-being? And a large empirical literature tells us that the quality and quantity of our social relationships is one of the best predictors of our physical and our mental health. But the million-dollar question is, how does that happen? What are the mechanisms? And our group focuses on emotion and emotion regulation as one set of mechanisms that are probably important. And when we think of emotion, we think of how we feel. I feel angry, I feel happy. But importantly, they also involve a really big biological piece. So as I get angry, my blood pressure goes up. As I get happy, it comes down. So emotions can influence health directly through biological mechanisms. Also, however, how we feel has a big say in what we feel like doing. So if you're sort of sad, depressed, you probably don't want to get out of bed in the morning. You might feel like eating some chocolate to feel better. You definitely don't feel like going to the gym. And so our emotions have a big role in the kind of health behaviors that we do or do not engage in. So emotion can influence health in a lot of different ways. Importantly, though, emotions don't just, well, they're not static. They happen over time. So emotions play out, you get happier, you get sadder, and so on. And they happen in relationships. And so the emotions we have and how we go about regulating them can influence our relationships, but our relationships can influence the emotions we have and how we are able to regulate them or not. So we essentially end up with a dynamic system
of these various aspects of emotion playing out over time in the individual as well as even within their relationships. So here's my fried egg diagram of a temporal interpersonal emotion system. The top row of eggs is one person, the bottom row is another person. Within each person you have the various aspects of emotion, so your feelings, your biology, your behaviors, and those are interacting within you over time in ways that can influence your health. But they're also interacting in your close partners within them, and all those arrows are to show that there's feedback loops over time driving both your own emotions and the partner's emotions, and we are mutually influencing each other. So this is essentially a picture of a dynamic system. And so to study dynamic systems, we need mathematical and statistical models that can represent this kind of complexity. So this is real data. These would be 3 different couples in the lab having a conversation. And this is the emotions they reported over time from positive to negative. And what we see is different kinds of emotional patterns in the dynamics. So this first couple is getting more and more positive as the interaction goes on. The next couple, whatever's happening, they are really in sync with each other. The third couple, they're completely out of sync. So things like differential equations can be used to represent these different patterns, which allows us to essentially measure them and then test whether they actually predict anything related to health. So is one of these a better or worse pattern for your health? Well, that's the research question. So we've studied these in a variety of real-life health settings. We've looked at relationships where one or both partners smoke. And the question becomes, do different emotional dynamics emerge if one or both partners are actually smoking? And how does that make it harder or easier for them to give up the habit? We've addressed a very similar thing around weight issues and looked at couples where one or both partners are overweight and struggling with weight issues. And again, asked the question, do different kind of emotional dynamics around eating and activity in these couples end up making it harder or easier for different kinds of couples to lose weight when they need to? Savannah is here somewhere, a first-year student, is taking this into the realm of older adults and looking at the emotional dynamics that occur when the woman is going through the transition to menopause. And turns out that as a field, we know absolutely nothing about what constitutes healthy emotional interpersonal functioning at this important transition. So yay, Savannah, we'll know in a year. We've looked at it in families where the woman is dealing with breast cancer, has been diagnosed with breast cancer, and asked what kind of emotional dynamics and emotional regulation patterns at the family level predict doing better or worse with that diagnosis and surviving into the future. And finally, Anna Fonseca, who's here, is taking us into the realm of culture, because culture influences pretty much everything there is to know about emotions. And so she'll be looking at the different kind of emotional dynamics that come about when you have both partners from a similar culture or from very different cultural backgrounds. And with that, I will say thank you to my collaborators and funders and finish on time.
I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody, especially can we give it up for all the faculty who really play the game with us. Like everyone stayed on time and got in line. I mean, these are just amazing people. They're such a great team. It felt like it was like an Olympic relay race. I also just want to give a shout out to Allie Stosi, who works with FMI, because she helped to put all the slides together and make sure we had snacks and kept time, even though she was afraid all of you were going to get really mad at her. And also to Felice Baca, who's not here, who also helped with coordinating all the slides and all the activities. So thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see some of you later at the Butler.
Yeah.